It takes another level of guts to undertake some of the most dangerous and frightening adventures that many explorers do not think twice about taking on. Exploring some of the most uncharted parts of the water is something that intrigues the brave-hearted and adventurous personas in the cave diving community. This story happens to be one of the scariest cave diving expeditions gone wrong. Sit back, relax, and listen to the sad tale of Rob Parker. Of all the several locations in the world that possess a blue hole, the Caribbean has the majority of blue hole numbers, with Andros, the largest island in the Bahamas, having more blue holes than any other in the Caribbean. Blue holes, as wondrous as they can be, are noted among some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Outside of an uncharted underwater cave, a blue hole is scarier than that. They are basically sinkholes that are composed of highly carbonated rocks that slowly develop over a long period of time. Having no external drainage, a blue hole is just a basin. At the opening of a blue hole, sea life would be present, but when you decide to go in deeper, it is duly absent, as the depths of blue holes are toxic and specially filled with hydrogen sulfide. Due to the absence of oxygen in the depths of this hole, termed as anoxic, it makes it extremely dangerous for one to explore this location, as a diver can easily suffer from nitrogen narcosis, where the person slowly begins to lose consciousness of their surroundings. Divers going into these depths have to be highly trained and skilled effectively in underwater diving, as articulation in these parts is different from normal, and the chances of fatalities are raised to a maximum. Deep in the barrier reef along the fault line of the Bahamas is a blue ocean hole called the Four Sharks Blue Hole. The entrance of the hole is a coral-reefed basin, and it adherently leads to arguably the largest caverns in all of the Bahamas. Analyzing the terrain of this cavern, it has two chambers. The first chamber is a 230 feet long and 65 feet wide space that is called the Calic Cavern, as this part has been explored fully and completely mapped out, and is over 196 feet deep. Meanwhile, stretching to the far side at the right of the cavern, there is a narrow crack at about 131 feet, and it descends into another passage, unexplored, with unknown depths and unknown composition. It is highly advised to stay away from this cavern, as there is no specific information about this part. With only a very narrow passage prior to entering that second part, it requires perfect navigation to avoid the sharp crevices around the passage. Rumors surrounding this unexplored cavern suggest that upon entering this second chamber, the immediate sights are literally out of this planet. Ultimately, it's a literal death wish to enter into this second cavern, as it hasn't been explored. But this is the driving force to inspire the risk-taking and highly adventurous cave divers into exploring that part and, charting it out. The tale of the explorer Rob Parker, a 35-year-old from Bournemouth, England, has always been an adventurer from a young age, as he was always participating in adventure sports and loved climbing the cliffs along the Dorset coastline. At a very young age, he had established himself as one of the country's top cave explorers and climbers. He did this after he moved to Bristol, which had the luxury of the Mendip Caves very close to him. Music to Rob's ears, I guess. Rob started to engulf himself in cave diving travails when he heard one of his cave explorer friends had gone into that field. And Rob is the kind of person who believes, anything you can do, I can do better. He was set to one-up his friends and venture into cave diving because, yes, Rob was very competitive and a highly competitive individual, and he set out to conquer this field as he had in cave exploration and climbing. In no short time, Rob associated himself with a mentor, a cave diving legend named Martin Farr. He was then introduced to Wookie's cave complex by his mentor. Rob had endless energy and was a serious go-getter who always sought to make the impossible possible. This association with Martin Farr was the seed of Rob's growth in the cave diving and exploration field. Now, this was the beginning of the rocketing movement of his career. In 1984, the hunger for adventure in Rob took him to Mexico to get a chance to work hand-in-hand with a top American cave diver named Bill Stone. The pair's competitive and go-getting nature aided in both of them building a strong relationship with one another, and their relationship thrived. The following year, Stone came to the UK to serve as a support diver and also a technical advisor to Rob for his exploration of the Wookiee system. In no time, Rob started taking on projects both in England and abroad as his services were required, and he began to gain the recognition he so desired. Rob continued to explore caves above and below water, playing leading roles in the exploration of the Bohemian Blue Holes to the uncharted caves in China. Rob Parker became extremely famous for his work as his resume continued to grow beyond bounds, recognizing him as one of the best cave explorers in the entire world. At some points too, He was also carried around in military transport, as Rob was contracted by some countries to assist and undertake some rescue missions. At this point, he was really well known, and his resume had expanded farther than what he'd expected, leading him to another expedition with Bill Stone and a couple of experienced U.S. divers to explore one of the world's deepest underwater caves at Wakulla Springs in northern Florida. The group used a different kind of technology to explore the caves, the recently discovered mixed gas technology with futuristic underwater scooters and a specially designed diving bell. A new rebreather system designed by Bill Stone, a gear similar to the ones that astronauts use for space exploration, allowing divers to spend up to 24 hours at a time underwater. In the coming years, Rob started to develop some illnesses that were coming at random intervals due to his numerous explorations, and he was gradually becoming rusty in the art. So, he decided to turn his focus to some other interests, and then diversified into climbing. As he already had a history in his early years of climbing the cliffs at the Dorset coastline, he climbed Mount Everest, and was a well-recognized extreme technical climber who toured the world in fulfilling his major interest. This climbing business he started was so successful that he would not be required to take a regular job. Regardless of all this, Rob's interest in diving didn't waver, as he was still undertaking some diving here and there. Things got a little bit interesting when, while on a dive in the Bahamas, Rob Parker met Rob Palmer for the very first time. Rob Palmer was one of Britain's leading technical advisors and divers, well noted in this art, and was well known for his exploration and writing on the blue holes in the Bahamas. Stargate, a spectacular inland blue hole in the Bahamas, was set to be explored by a team of explorers, all led by Rob Palmer in the 1980s. It was more than a 300-feet drop from below the center of the Andros jungle. After that expedition, Palmer continued to explore Stargate a couple of times. During one of his explorations, he found an Indian canoe that was dated to be about hundreds of years old. In another expedition, he also found some Indian bones that were dated back to about 500 years old. He did not hesitate to turn over these artifacts to the Department of Archives in Nassau. Palmer then shifted into filmmaking, as he was hired to help with the filming of a German television show on blue holes. Before they started filming, he attended a technical diving conference in Hurghada, Egypt. While at the conference, a seawall was mentioned, and being fascinated by the concept of a seawall, he decided to explore one. The moment they were in the water, Rob Palmer dived straight into the blue rather than going towards the seawall. His friends then tried to grab him, but Rob was descending so fast, they decided to stop once they had gone down about 200 feet and watched from afar as he descended. Confused about whether he was out of control or not, they didn't know what to do, and in a short time, they lost sight of him. Reports stated that he was using borrowed equipment, and as a result, he was met with a health crisis as he had a heart attack. He died in August 1997. After that tragedy happened, Rob Parker was called upon to undertake the role they expected Palmer to take before his demise. This part was going to be filmed in the very dangerous blue hole, the Four Sharks Blue Hole. Parker had a dive partner named Dan Malone, who had both been diving into depths of over 350 feet in a cave system that had been explored, but was just nearby. After 10 days of diving into these depths, they rested for the next 2 days to clear out the excess nitrogen from their system. The filming was about to start, and the pair decided to go diving one more time. This time, they wanted to dive into the Four Sharks Blue Hole. They saw this as an opportunity to push farther than just the first cavern, and to enter into the forbidden and dangerous uncharted cavern. He knew that the filming crew would not let him venture into those parts, so the plan was to go in there and come out before the filming crew was ready for filming. His friend and diving partner Dan Malone was skeptical about the entire idea, but he didn't want to turn down Rob, so he gave his consent to go ahead with the event. Other divers found out about this plot and wanted in on it too, but said they weren't going to go all the way to the unexplored cavern and would only stay at the Calic Cavern. They pushed down into the hole as they descended over 300 feet beyond the previously discovered limit. However, they didn't take the right tide and had no choice but to turn back to avoid being pushed or pulled by the inflow of water from the open ocean. Eventually, the slack tide came at about 8 p.m., and Dan, alongside Rob, descended into the hole, attempting to enter the forbidden passage. Both men wore their tanks side-mounted to navigate the dangerous narrow passage, marked their guideline in and out of it, and then proceeded through the unexplored cavern. Everything was going well, just as they had hoped for going into this cavern. After setting sights on scary but amazing views, they both decided to make their way out of the cave as they were beginning to run out of air, and the slack tide could change at any time. As they were making their way out of the cavern, one of the regulators on Dan's tank failed, forcing him to switch to using compressed air. It was really terrifying, but being an experienced diver, he kept a cool head. As a result, he had a huge narcosis rush, which felt like drinking a large pack of beer in seconds. When they got to the passage, the rush stopped. As they kept moving, it looked like Rob was signaling to him as if he was in distress and needed some help. But then Rob shook his head as if he was fine. It wasn't comforting for Dan, but he kept swimming as he was ahead and Rob was below him. After a while, he looked down and saw that Rob had stopped kicking his fins and was starting to descend as if he were free-falling into the water. Terrified, Dan rushed after him to catch up and began to assist him in getting up the passage. He managed to grab him by the ankle and pull him up. It appeared that Rob was unconscious at this point, but then, when they got to the edge of the passage, Rob started moving again and was flapping his fins as he had before. Dan was so relieved as they both made the ascent up the passage. His air was almost exhausted, but they had spare tanks at the other end. When they eventually got there, a relieved Dan took one of the tanks and replenished his oxygen. However, as he looked back, he saw no sign of Rob anymore. He then called the attention of the support diver to assist him in recovering Rob, as it seemed he had lost consciousness and free-fallen into the depths once more. Dan was taken aback by what had just happened, and he really couldn't believe his eyes. When he arrived at the surface at about 2 a.m., he climbed back on the dive boat and told Rob's friend and the German TV crew what had happened down below and that Rob was not coming back. Steffi, the wife of Rob Palmer, was furious that she wasn't called upon to assist in the rescue of Rob, but Dan disagreed, saying any attempt would have led to double losses. It wasn't until 2 days later that his body was recovered, and it's still unclear what caused his death. Reports suggest that he died due to nitrogen narcosis and was disoriented. It was a really sad tale, as he was a very skilled, and at the same time, cautious diver. Nonetheless, this reminds us of the danger that revolves around all kinds of cave diving, as it has reportedly claimed the lives of so many. And that was the chilling tale of Rob Parker's tragic dive. This story is a sobering reminder that even the most skilled divers can face unforeseen dangers when pushing the limits of human exploration. Cave diving is a thrill, but it demands extreme caution. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more incredible stories from the world of extreme adventure. And remember, stay curious, but stay safe. See you in the next one.